All right, guys. Sorry, I'm 1 minute late, I think. All right. So Jacob's there, Laura, Tyson. Good to see all of you guys. All right. So can everybody hear me? If there's a problem, please tell me. Are we good? Should be. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Jacob. All right, here we go. So let's start with the website. So do I have anything to talk about that's not in the questions? I don't think so. Not this month. Not this month. All right, Adam appears. All right, Adam. All the usual suspects are here, so that's great. All right, so I'm going to start with the website, and then we'll move on to the other platform. So David Flores asks, could you talk about your new technique of setting stones into your carvings? I'm curious as to how you manage to attach them to the carving itself, and how do you decide what stone colors to use in any given piece? So those of you who have seen it or not, if you follow me on social media, I started this technique a while ago. I guess about maybe 3 years ago, I did my first carving where I inserted semi-precious stones, and then I've been kind of looking for different commissions to be able to do this because I just think it's an interesting technique. It's an interesting. The great thing about that technique is it really shows. How can I say this? The possible vibrancy of a tradition, because when you look at those images that I did with the inserted stones, they look like something which has existed in the past, but it hasn't. There's never been that type of mix of carving with inserted semi-precious stones, especially and with gilding and everything. I've never seen that in churches before. So it's interesting. It's interesting for me to make something which, when you look at it, you feel like it could have been made 1,000 years ago, but at the same time, it couldn't have been made 1,000 years ago because they weren't using that technique. So the way that I attach them is pretty labor intensive. We dig the hole. I mean, we carve a hole into the stone, and so the stone is set into the stone piece is set into the main stone that's the carvings in. And then with just with epoxy, because epoxy with stone, it's great. It holds, forever. And so with epoxy, we glue the stones into those let's say crevices. And if there's a little bit of too much, like there's too much play between the stone and the rest, the semi-precious stone and the rest of the stone, then with some grout, or sometimes with a mix of stone powder and glue and epoxy, we'll fill in the holes to make it nicer. So you're gonna see some, like the one I'm doing for Jordan Peterson. I'm working on it right now with my assistant. He's actually doing right now, putting in the stones. There's a dragon at the bottom of that carving, and it has all these pieces of lapis lazuli in the dragon, like on the scales of the dragon are all lapis. So it's gonna be pretty intense. And so we're doing that right now. I think I posted some pictures of that as I'm working on it. And so, I mean, how do you decide the stone colors you use? I mean, it's just like any composition. You have to balance. You have to pick the right colors, just like you would in a painting. So there's no, we look at the different colors, and some colors have some, let's say, some kind of symbolic meaning, gold. And I mean, obviously some colors have more symbolic meanings, but some are more just for it to be harmonious. All right. So Luke Fleischman asks 3 questions. The dreaded question. First question is, what are your thoughts on the Yang Gang meme? That I posted something on Twitter about that, where at first, when I saw this appearing, I was seriously confused. I was like, what is this thing? Like, what is this? I'd never heard of this guy. And then I was wondering why all the you could say all the Chan type, all the Reddit Chan type memes were all of a sudden, bubbling up for this guy, and you could see there was a weird Pepe dragon figure and all these different memes. And so I don't know what to think about it. I think I've seen some people talk about it and suggest that this might be a move from some like left-wing people to try to get some of the Trump vote, to like get the people that voted for Trump and to kind of get them on board to vote for this Yang fellow. But I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, I don't really follow it very carefully. And so some of the things that have come out have been funny. Someone mentioned that, Andrew comes from andros, comes from the root for man, and Yang obviously is the Chinese principle for masculinity, and so people thought that it was like this return of the masculine. I don't know, I don't know. I don't follow American politics close enough, but for sure it's very strange. It seems, I mean, it might just be I saw some memes where it was like you could see people, which is like there was Bernie Bros and Trump supporters kind of coming together around this Yang guy, and so maybe that's the move that people are trying to do, because a lot of people have noticed that the new right, or the alt right, or whatever you want to call it, not all of them, but some of them, they're authoritarian, they're not libertarian, and so they have more, they're not necessarily anti-state, and so they're actually pro-state and pro-state control, and so they might have some things in common with the extreme left. And so it's not good. It wouldn't be really great if those two forces came together. If the extreme right and the extreme left came together, that's not good. That would not be good, because that's what happened in Weimar Germany. Everybody forgets that the Nazi means National Socialist. It's a joining of the right and the left together into one thing. And so I don't know. I hope that it doesn't work, whatever plan they have. Okay, so could you go into the symbolism of a demigod? Would I be wrong in thinking of it as a sort of a precursor to Christ? Well, I would say precursor to Christ in the sense that everything is a precursor to Christ. To that extent, you could see in some of the stories of the demigods, you do find some things which tend to point to Christ. I totally agree. But I think that it's important to understand in the story of Christ and in the tradition after Christ, it was extremely important for the fathers to say that Christ was fully God and fully man. And the reason why was to avoid the problem of the demigod, in part of the demigod, because you could see some resemblances, right, in the notion that God the Father, that the mother of God became pregnant with God, with the Logos. And so would that story resemble, the kind of raptures that you see of God, of the Zeus, or the God, the father god of Greek or Roman mythology, who impregnates women? And so I think that the fathers really tried to separate themselves from that. Although I don't think that it's completely insane to think that in some ways it's pointing towards Christ. I think it's also important to understand the difference. One of the big differences is that the demigods are more akin to the margin. They're more akin to the periphery, because they're a hybrid, and they're kind of viewed as hybrids, and that's why they appear as kind of, as these heroic figures, who heroic not necessarily in the sense that we understand it today, but in the sense that they're strong, they like Hercules, or or Achilles, you know, that they have superpowers type thing. And so they're there to fight off, they fight off monsters. They do that kind of stuff because they're, in a way, they're actually on the border between humans and gods. They're not totally gods and they're not totally human. So they're kind of these monstrous figures. So I think that it's important to understand the difference. So, all right. So third question from Luke. Good questions, by the way, Luke. This third question is, what do you think the symbolic significance of global warming, climate change might be? Well, I've been wanting to make a video about that. I was thinking of making a video about that at some point, because I think that the global warming, climate change thing, what it is, it's a form of secular apocalypticism. You know, it really is the same structure as when I was young evangelical and people were telling me that, you know, the world is going to end and this is the sign, and there's doomsday in front of us. And it is a form of millennialism. You know, it's a form of the end is nigh. It's the same thing. It's just clothed differently, but, you know, it's the same as the nuclear holocaust when we were kids, and, you know, we thought that the world could end with a nuclear holocaust. It's all the same thing. It's all the same thing. And I think that it's interesting to study the global warming, climate change thing. I think that using this, whether or not it's actually going to happen, I mean, whether or not it's just a political narrative, or whether or not it's a mix of political narrative and science. I really actually do like, one time someone asked Jordan about this, and I thought his answer was pretty wise. He said, I can't differentiate the science from the politics when I hear people talk about climate change. And so because of that, it's difficult to know when people are actually being objective in terms of science, or whether they're in a narrative. And I think it's really great because it's showing us, you know, I did this last video about how flat Earth is showing us how the world of kind of rational thinking is, let's say, of this rational bubble that we created in the Enlightenment, how it's breaking apart, and symbolic thinking is coming back. And so it's coming back in all kinds of weird ways. At first, it's not necessarily coherent, but this idea that we can no longer differentiate the narrative from the quote unquote science is partly us understanding that, you know, that meaning is inevitable. And you can see it as it's frustrating because we see it in, because it's happening as the world is kind of falling apart. We see it in news. We see it. We watch news now. You can't ask yourself, what's your narrative? We can no longer just wonder whether or not they're just telling you the facts, because it just seems impossible to do that anymore. And so in terms of global warming, I think that it can be a useful tool to explain to someone what it means for God to judge the world, because the way that people understand, let's say, when they read the story of Noah, and they think, how could God be so horrible? How could God destroy the whole world and cause a flood? And it's really fascinating, because if you study the traditions of Enoch, you see that as the world becomes more and more technological, as they learn about magic and about smithing and everything technological, and as they do that, they become more warring. They have more fights between each other, and they also become decadent. They create mixture. They also become sexually decadent. And so it's like all that is happening, and then the flood. And so you think, oh, how horrible is it that God would punish the world that way? But the same person that would think that can also think that if we continue to at the pace that we're going, if we continue, capitalism continues the way it does, if we continue to pollute the earth like this, the world is going to destroy us. And they sometimes it really does have like a mythological narrative where it's like Mother Earth is going to spit us out, and the world is going to reject us. We're as if we're parasites on the earth. And so and so it's actually an interesting way to show people what the judgment of God is, because God's judgment is also the causality of our own actions. It's like the judgment of God is related to it's the meaning. How you could say it this way: the judgment of God is often the meaning of the consequences of our actions, right? And so it's like someone starts to cheat on his wife, and then his wife finds out, and his wife leaves them, and then he starts to drink, then he becomes an alcoholic, and then he he loses his job, and he becomes a total loser, and then he gets on heroin, and then he starts to, and then you'd say like, oh, that man has been judged by God. He's under the judgment of God. But the judgment of God is the meaning of the consequences of his own actions. And so, I mean, not that sometimes there can't be like a lightning bolt that comes down. I believe that is totally possible. But but in general, usually there's a relationship between the actions that you pose and the judgment you receive. That's why if you look at medieval representations of hell, for example, the punishment that the person receives in hell is always related to the sin that they committed. And so, for example, someone who was a glutton, you'll see them in hell being stuffed by demons, like being stuffed with food by demons until their stomach explodes, and so the same thing, like with let's say someone who had a kind of sexual perversion, then you'll see them being abused by demons in hell. And so it's always, the idea is that your actions bring about their own consequences, and those consequences are also are also God's judgment upon you. So hope that answers that. All right. So Joser 733. 2 questions. Could you comment on the symbolism? Laura Gilles says, yes, do a video on the 7 deadly sins for Lent. That'd be a good idea to do a video on the traditional deadly sins. Maybe I'll do that. I don't know if I'll do it for Lent, but I maybe do it at some point. Okay, so 2 questions. Could you comment on the symbolism of adaptation? So the symbolism of adaptation. Well, I don't know if you mean in general. I mean, if you mean in general, it's not very difficult to understand. The symbolism of adaptation is the capacity for the pattern it's what shows that the pattern transcends the particulars. And so as let's say the ground changes, as the situation that you're in modifies itself, then you adapt, then you will adapt things to that change. And so the change which happens in the circumstances, it's like a question. It's like saying, I don't know, you're moving toward, you want to walk to the end of the street to put put an envelope in the mailbox. And so you're going there, and then as you're walking, I don't know, a tree fell down and is blocking the road. And so now you have to adapt yourself. And so based on the goal, based on the purpose, then you have to change in order to reach your purpose. But the pattern, the basic pattern or the basic logos is the same. And then you adapt. That's what you change based on your purpose. So that is the symbolism of adaptation. But you'll notice that I think that a lot of kind of evolutionary theorists will not agree with me because they don't believe in an essence, or they don't believe in a logos. They don't believe in a telos, although you could say that reproduction is already a telos, like the desire to perpetuate, the desire to remain relevant, to remain alive. That desire is already a purpose. And so in that sense, it's what makes you be able to then adapt to whatever circumstances present itself to you. But of course, people who who talk about evolution don't believe in intention in the in evolution. They don't believe that it's only randomness. And then, but there is still, even if there's randomness, it's really interesting. It's like, even if there's randomness, survival is a form of choosing. Survival is a form of purpose. And so it's like, you know, let's say you don't want to use the word God, but you could say that no matter what, there's some principle which selects what will survive. And then that which survives, there's some principle which makes that, or self-reproduction or whatever, makes that the telos of life. So I don't know. Hopefully that answered enough on adaptation. And so I read Lewis's Discarded Image and J.R. Tolkien's on fairies, but I'm still a bit unclear as to what they were understood as. Could you comment on fairies as well? I mean, the way that I understand fairies is that they're kind of these wild principalities. They're okay. You could see them this way. One way you could see them is you could see them as remainders of a past hierarchy. That's an interesting way to see things like fairies. To understand that, let's say there was, before, a long time ago, before Christianity, there was a basic, let's say there was a hierarchy of principalities, and then Christ came, and Christianity came and replaced that hierarchy. Probably, you would think that probably because it was decadent, probably because it was already breaking apart for whatever reason. In terms of Celtic religion, that's for sure. The Romans had dealt a blow to Celtic religion way before Christians appeared on the scene. You know, Caesar slaughtered the Druids because he wanted to control the Celts. By the time the Christians arrived, the Celts, their religion was in shambles. And so you can imagine that. So their religion is in shambles. There's no, there's this chaotic fringe, let's say, principalities which are still kind of floating around, and that would create a form of kind of tribalism and different little tribes that are in competition with each other, that can't kind of unite, and then, I mean, probably under the Roman Empire, that helped it to create some stability in some places at least. So then when Christianity replaces that hierarchy, there's still a remainder of the ancient hierarchy, and that remainder ends up getting pushed out into the margins, and so they really become like wild spirits. And that's why the images of the fairies and whatnot is that they're usually associated with kind of forest, out in the forest, out in kind of dark places, and kind of out of the way places, you could say. And so I think that's what they are. And so that's the way that I understand fairies. But it doesn't mean that they necessarily have to be negative. They're just wild. And I think that's probably one of the things that some people would disagree with me on, is that how can I say this? It's like there still could be little nuggets of something that you can find that is worthwhile, but it's very random and it's very difficult to discriminate, and that's why, like, you meet, for example, let's say you meet like New Age people, and these New Age people, they kind of went into their weird New Age world, and then they started to have these strange experiences where they're encountering all these spirits or whatever, all these things, whether, depending on how they see it, they're encountering aliens, or they're encountering spirits, or they're encountering fairies, how it is that they want to formulate it. But they've kind of thrown themselves into this chaotic sea of intelligences or principalities, and then it's usually to their detriment. Like, it usually is to their their slow downfall into a weird kind of self-absorption, or, you know, all kinds of strange things. But once in a while, like, I know people who in that world, that kind of weird new age world, they had an experience which brought them to Christ. You know, they saw the Mother of God, or they encountered something, which some being, some principality who pointed them towards Christ. And so it's like, I don't know, you know, it's not totally impossible. But I hope you guys understand what I'm talking about. I usually don't use these types of words, but the thing that happens is, as once you start to understand that the world manifests itself as intelligences, and manifests itself as logi, and as purpose, and even to a certain extent as persons, then you'll notice that these things start to make sense. And you can, you know, like we all saw this, we all saw the Alex Jones on Joe Rogan. I think anybody's here would probably have seen that. And when Alex Jones is talking about the, you know, the clockwork elves, and the, you know, that they're aliens, that they're clockwork elves, that they're all these different things that people encounter when they're taking you know, they're taking DMT or some other kind of psychedelic drug, you know. And also, you know, he talked about this idea that when a group of people take psychedelics, they can have the same experience. They can encounter the same beings out there. And so it's like, that's, once you start to understand that's how the world lays itself out as principalities, and that those principalities are like little personalities. They're just like a personality is like a cohesive, you know, it's a cohesive set of patterns that make you something, that make you a person. And those cohesive patterns, they have a certain form of existence. You can see it in a fictional character as well, how you can recognize Batman by a certain pattern. And so you can, you know, those principalities, they exist, and it's possible, and for people encounter them. It's probably not a good idea to start to do that. I don't, you know, I've never taken psychedelics, so I don't know, but I think that it could lead people astray, just because unless you really have a very high level of discrimination and a kind of a really high level of training, you know, you meet all these wild patterns, and you can attach yourself to them, and they can totally lead you into weird directions. All right. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys, and I'm not freaking anybody out. Probably am freaking people out, but okay. So Laura Gilles says, the symbolic worldview is definitely allowing you to unpack many things, Jonathan. However, I'd like to know how dangerous someone like Alex Jones is. Someone who both perceives at some level the symbolic structures of things, but because his worldview is fundamentally unsound, he can lead people astray. Seriously, astray. He is obviously not grounded in classic, orthodox, small o here Christianity. He's connecting into archetype symbols, but doesn't have the full picture. So I think that, you know, I think, Laura, that question you asked is great. I think it really fits into what I was just talking about before, is that it is possible to have these intuitions, you know, and to for example, go into the, you know, kind of enter into this intermediary world of principalities, you could say, and have a perception of them, and have an intuition about them. And it is a dangerous thing. It can be dangerous, and it, like you said, it can totally lead people astray. The problem we have today, guys, and I think this is something that maybe I should mention more and more, is that there's not a lot left which is not contaminated. You know, everybody everything is tainted. Everything is tainted and everything is very strange right now. The whole world is very strange. Everything is weird and everything is upside down. And everything is kind of strange. We're in the margins right now, and so it becomes difficult. You know, like if you look at what's happened now, like if you look at the scandals that happened in the Catholic Church, the book that came out, what is it, just last month? I haven't read the book, but I've kind of heard a lot of people talking about it. And, you know, the insane amount of kind of disturbed, you know, gay orgies and pedophilia and whatever that is in the higher levels of the Vatican of Rome. And the Orthodox Church is not completely free of that. We had some scandals with the head of the church in Serbia. You know, there was even some videos of him with like children and stuff. And so it's like there's some weird stuff happening in the places where the hierarchy is supposed to, in our own hierarchies, let's say, in our own hierarchies of people. And so when things get really, really weird, you have to keep your eyes open, is all I'm saying. You have to keep your eyes open. And I think that someone like Alex Jones is someone that it's worth paying attention to a certain extent, not too much, but to a certain extent, because he's acting like a kind of tuning fork where he does intuitively understand a lot of things that are going on intuitively. And he also is acting like a canary in a coal mine, because he has become the one to attract the ire of the powers that be. And so because of that, I think it's important to continue to pay attention to him as a character, let's say, as a figure in the story. And I think that's going to be the same with Jordan Peterson. I think there's some questions about him in the question. I'll talk about that when I get there, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing that's going on with him as well. All right. Okay. So I think, let's see. I think those are all the questions from I think those are all the questions from the website. All right, let's go to Subscribestar. All right, not a lot of questions on Subscribestar. All right, okay, so Christian Chad, is Christian Chad here in the that is no way that's a real name. I keep every time I come to people and I see a name and I go, that's not your real name, and then it turns out it is. If Christian Chad is your real name, that, like, you are a living meme if that's true, but I don't know if that's true. So Christian Chad said, you've said in multiple videos that we have not learned the correct lessons from World War II. What lessons should we have learned, and why did we arrive at the position we are today? So the questions that were being posed in World War II, there are a lot. I mean, there was a lot of things going on. It's hard to totally focus on just one. But I would say that at the basics, you could really see that it's playing out the problem of having eliminated a proper ontological hierarchy. It is the result of the breakdown of the medieval synthesis, we call it. And so in the Middle Ages, there came to be a synthesis between, you know, in that very, very dark time that everybody likes to talk about, in the dark ages. But you know, in the let's say from the 10th to the 12th centuries, things started to stabilize. And also in the Byzantine Empire, the intellectual tradition there really was a synthesis between, let's say, Hellenistic thinking, even some elements of Persian thinking, and then the Judaic thinking in the figure of Christ. So there's this synthesis of a massive scale, and then that started to break down at the end of the Middle Ages. and the World War II is the fruits of that. And so this is a place where I totally do agree with Jordan Peterson in terms of the two extremes. You could call them, there's more than two in World War II. There's more than two, really. And so what we see is a kind of internationalism, a kind of classless, in theory, right? You know, a classless worship of the worship of the lower part of the hierarchy, and wanting to make everything equal and everything universal, without identities, without nation, without all that. So this kind of it was really a globalism in the form of communism versus extreme nationalism and exclusionary, let's say, nationalism. And so that's what was going on. And we don't talk about the causes. Like we never talk about how Nazism is a reaction to communism in a large part. You know, how communism is a reaction to capitalism. And then so you have these weird trio that are kind of fighting for the 20th century. And we rarely talk about that, because now we have the same problem. We have the same problem where we have nationalism and globalism, and it's like, and then we have the let's say a last ditch effort to preserve a kind of society of freedom or whatever. But that society of freedom, it's what you would expect from a society of freedom. It's degenerating, it's falling apart, it's breaking apart because there's nothing to hold it together. And so, you know, we can try to hold on to it as much as we want. You know, it's not going to hold because it doesn't have something bringing it together. And so then you have the globalist answer, and then you have this nationalist answer, and both of them are going to lead us on the same path as what was there in the 30s. All we need is an economic, a mass economic downturn. That's all we need. Right now, it's like everything is on edge, and if there's a massive recession, it's like there's no hope. Yeah. So, sorry guys, I hate when these become dark. I don't like the dark. I want the dark stuff. All right. So Chris in chat asks, I see a progressive authority that thinks of itself as a resistance movement, but acts like an established order. This is all very confusing symbolically. Can you unpack this for me? Yeah, it really is an upside down world. We live in an upside down world. We live in a world where the victim acts like a tyrant, you know. And so it was also the same. We saw the same thing happened in World War II again. The Nazis and the communists both portrayed themselves as victims and then acted as tyrants. And so it's confusing, but it's not that confusing, because it has to do with pride. It has to do with the first sin. It has to do with viewing yourself as innocent, viewing yourself as a victim, and then because of that, being blind to your own sins and being blind to your own actions on the others. And so you could imagine Satan, you know, not accepting God's judgment, thinking that he was right, and that his casting out of paradise is unfair and is unjust, and that he deserved better. And so because of that, he thinks that he deserves to be God. And so whatever he does he doesn't, there's no, he can't see his own sins. He only sees the sin of another, you know, and it's not, it's like, yeah, so it has to do with pride. You know, pride is the dark side of the ascent. You know, it's I always talk about how every symbolism has kind of two sides, you could say. And so pride is the dark side of the ascent. You see that in I gave a talk on St-Gregory of Nyssa, and I talk about the ascent of the mountain, and then St-Gregory of Nyssa in the Book of Moses, he hints to, as he's talking about the ascent of Moses, he also hints to what he calls the false ascent, or the ascent which is really a descent, and that's the ascent of pride, and that's it. That's the tyranny. That's all that stuff is all related to not to seeing yourself as as a victim of others, and that therefore your actions cannot be judged by anybody because you're a victim. So, and that's how genocides happen. Like that's very scary. The fact that the left right now continues to portray itself as a victim, all the while being in power in terms of institutions, that is so scary. That's what leads to very bad places in society. The same thing happened with the Tutsi massacre. The people often don't know a lot about the Hutu-Tutsi, let's say, dynamic. The Tutsis, those that were massacred, were a minority and were the leaders of the country. So because they were the minority and the leaders, they kept things for themselves, and the Hutus were the disenfranchised, and so the Hutus saw themselves as disenfranchised. Most Europeans, before the people don't talk about this, but most Europeans, especially the left-wing Europeans, most left-wing Europeans that were in Africa at the time of the massacre, before the massacre began, were all pro-Hutu, because the Hutus were seen as the victims of the Tutsis who were in power. And then when the Hutus started to massacre the Tutsis, they felt like they had every right to do that, because they were the majority, because they had been they were the victims of the Tutsis, and therefore whatever they did was justified. So, yeah. Okay. So John B asks, he asks, come on, this Jordan Peterson thing is getting weird. Can he keep doing this without Christ? So I guess it comes to the question, it comes to the whole thing, even the question about with Alex Jones, is that we're in a messed up time, guys. And that's one of the reasons why I'm very careful not to just say things like, oh, there's been a lot of criticism of Jordan Peterson with Vox Day's book, and with Milo turning against him. Even Rachel Fulton Brown turned against him. Owen Benjamin, a lot of the more right-leaning people have turned on him. And to me, I don't see the world that way. I have said positive things about Milo, but there are plenty of negative things that I could say about Milo. And I have said some negative things as well. There are positive things that I can say about Jordan Peterson. And I have, of course, I have maybe more appreciation for him because we've become friends, but there's a lot of negative things about him as well. He says a lot of wacky stuff, especially in terms of Christianity. And so I don't feel like I've ever encouraged Christians to follow Jordan Peterson, but I think that he has important things to say. And when he says those, I'm happy to hear him. When Milo says important things, I'm happy to hear him. When You know, when Ben Shapiro says important things, I'm happy to hear them. When whoever it is, I'll just say that's what they said there. That's good. Same thing. Like Alex Jones. I don't follow Alex Jones. I don't. I think that he has strange ideas and he's hyperbolic and but I think that there's some things that we need to pay attention to what in what he's saying, and I can point you to those things, and the rest we can ignore and not focus on. Because, and the reason why I think that's the best way to be right now is just because, like I said, we're living in a time where everything is upside down, everything's topsy-turvy. We need to keep our eyes open because things change, things are changing very fast and are very, very weird, and I would say don't take anything that anybody is saying, automatically. It's just not, it's not the time, except for those that have halos. You can, those that have halos, and you can read, so wait, Christian Chad has appeared, and he said that is his name. That's amazing. Your name is Christian Chad. You are a living meme, my friend. That is pretty awesome. That's hilarious. That's so funny. So who's the virgin like side to your Christian Chad? We'd have to figure out a meme here with you. All right, that's awesome. I think you just totally made my day, guys. That's great. All right, so we're done with the subscribe star question. So let's go to Patreon. The virgin, yeah, maybe that's what it is. Jacob Russell says, "Who's the virgin godless?" We have to. All right. Okay, so here we go. We got a few here. So, okay, so Frank Rowley asks, after listening to Sam Harris and Joe Rogan express their desire for a road to forgiveness and redemption regarding those who have transgressed on social media or in the public square, I was struck by the sense that it might not even be possible in a secular context. What are your thoughts? Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. And I think that that's the surprise. One of the surprises that people are facing right now. One of the surprises people are facing is realizing that the world that we've created, the secular world, and all these causalities that nobody planned out has brought it to a point where there's no forgiveness. There just isn't. And so when they say we need to create a road to redemption, the problem is who is going to arbiter your redemption? Who is going to arbiter your forgiveness? There's no structure there. There's no road there. There just isn't a way for it to happen. It can still happen on a personal level. Obviously it can still happen on a one chance thing, but as structure, we have crazily removed it, and it's all sides. It's both sides. What is it that I saw today? Was it today where I saw people talking about Beto O'Rourke and saying that, bringing out the fact that he wrote some like murder fantasy when he was 15 years old, and they're bringing this out into the public sphere as if this somehow has any bearing on his life. It is absolutely insane. What's next? People are going to start to say, hey, we learned that you used to watch horror movies when you were 15. So you enjoyed watching people be decapitated and, getting their heads chopped off and getting disemboweled. Wow, that's pretty weird. You are a disturbed person. I'm wondering who would vote for you. And it's like, my goodness, it's very scary. It's not good. It's not going to get better. It's not going to get better. All right. So Drew Jacob says, ugh, I'd be in serious trouble. It's funny because Jacob and I, we had a private conversation today. We talked on Skype, and we actually talked about that about horror movies and our young days. All right, so Drew McMahon asks, I was discussing with a friend who is Christian the relationship between truth and love, and which is of higher rank. I claimed love and he claimed truth, arguing that love is an emotion that can fool you or be manipulated to a degree. But that truth was binary and clear cut, sort of a mathematics versus language juxtaposition, and therefore supreme. What are your thoughts? Is it even fair to try and put these into a hierarchy? It's funny because that conversation is one of the very first conversations that I had with Jordan Peterson, because I remember we had met for the very first time. We had met at some event that he gave about men. I forget what it was. And it was like a debate he had about men. And then we were going to go to the restaurant together, but he wanted to walk. And so we're walking back to his house after the restaurant. We're kind of walking. And then we started talking about this. And he was saying that he thought truth was at the top of the hierarchy, and I was saying that it's love, and so I can lay it out for you why I think that it's love. I think that it's love, just like Saint Paul says, right? The highest of these is love, is because we need to understand love as the very manner by which things exist, right? The very manner by which the question and the answer can exist. The very manner by which an identity can encounter something that's not their identity and then coexist. Right? Love is the possibility for multiplicity and unity to coexist. That to me, that's the highest definition of love. It's we are one together without multiplicity going away. So it's like one and the many at the same time. That's what love is. And so to me, that is the prerequisite for truth to even be a concept, for even to be anything. And love is in a way beyond being in the strict sense that we understand it, in the sense that it is right. It's the manner by which being can even lay itself out, because for being to be, there has to be identity and not identity, or identity and multiplicity for you to be able to even see anything, for anything to exist. And so, yeah, for sure, I'm with St. Paul on that. I think the highest of these is love. All right, so Norm Grondin asks, you had a conversation with Jordan Peterson a while back in which you spoke about intersectionality and how Christ transcends categories, existing in all of them at once, which would seem quite paradoxical. This idea strikes me as similar to what J.K. Chesterton wrote in Orthodoxy. Quote, mysticism keeps men sane. He has always had one foot in earth and the other in fairyland. He has always left himself free to doubt his gods, but unlike the agnostic of today, free also to believe in them. He has always cared more for truth than for consistency. If he saw two truths that seemed to contradict each other, he would take the two truths and the contradiction along with them. His spiritual sight is stereoscopic, like his physical sight. He sees two different pictures at once and yet sees all the better for that. Unquote. Okay, so my question, aside from looking for you to discuss the idea of this paradox more fully, is this paradox too much for people to bear, so they need to simplify it? And thus we get the fragmentation of Christianity across religious lines, as well as fundamentalists and atheists who just put blinders on that paradox in order to make sense of Christ, thus succumbing to low resolution thinking. All right. Well, for sure, I think that the paradox is important. The idea, I'm gonna make some videos. I already made a video about about this. It's one of my first videos. I think it's probably the first video I put up. It's called Sacred Symbol, Sacred Art. And in that, I talk about the left and the right hand. I haven't made any more videos about the left and the right hand, but I wrote a whole series of articles on that on the Orthodox Art Journal. And I'm probably going to make some videos on that, because I think it's relevant also to what we're seeing, the whole left brain, right brain notion, let's say of wide perception and precise, or, you know, let's say category making or category maintaining and exploratory, exploratory behavior. So I think that you really do need those two sides. And I think that, as you said, Christ transcends those two sides. That's why Christ is the one who's judging. Christ is the judge who has the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left hand. So Christ, transcends that, also unites them together. Just like you, in a way, in a very small way, you also unite those two sides within yourself. You could say Christ does that at a cosmic level. And so you do need those two sides to function together. Now, whether that has to do with the fragmentation of Christianity, maybe it does have to do with that, in the sense that the tradition, the fullness of the tradition, should, to a certain extent, contain both sides, right? Should contain what you could call the legal side, or the solid side, and then contain the prophetic side, you could call it. And so in the Old Testament, you had the Levites, who were the actual structure of the worship, who did the rituals, who did the sacrifices, all that, and then who also, let's say, transcribed, kept the Torah, kept the laws, had all the laws and everything. And then you had the prophets, who were, read Ezekiel, like crazy stuff, where they're being pulled by their hair and into heaven, and they're seeing all these things, and they're going around telling people to repent and all that stuff. And in Christianity, we have the ecclesial structure, and then we have the saints, and the ascetics as well. And so those two sides, they kind of coexist. And although, for example, we recognize the authority of your priest or your bishop or whatever, the authority of the saints is higher, right? It's higher than the authority of your priest. So you do have to submit to the authority of the actual church, but there is another aspect which is there to kind of balance it. And so I think that's why the fullness of tradition needs those two sides. Needs, the ascetic in his cave, who is in a trance, contemplating the mysteries of God, and you also need the fudgy priest who tells you that, who lays down the law once in a while and tells you should do things this way. And he doesn't totally understand why. And it's very frustrating, because sometimes you feel you're smarter than him, but he's still a priest. And so it's like, okay, so that's life, and this maybe is an opportunity to talk about that, because one of the problems that I'm seeing is a lot of the problems I'm seeing right now is people who have kind of through their research, a little bit through my videos, maybe through other people that they've encountered online, they are attracted to Christianity, they're attracted to the church, and then they go to church, and then they encounter that side, right? They encounter the kind of dogmatic, very kind of strict legal, doesn't seem to totally understand the deeper aspects of things side. And then they get disillusioned, and they think, what is this? What am I doing here, and everything. And I think I really encourage people to understand that that's a necessary part of the thing, and to be able to take things in stride and understand what people's functions are. People have different functions. We couldn't have only a bunch of free thinkers who are trying to understand symbolism. That wouldn't work. It's not gonna hold the world together. We also need people who are telling, who are saying, okay, so this is what we're gonna do. This is when we're gonna meet. This time. This is how we're gonna do things. We're gonna, whatever structure of authority is there. So we need both. All right. So Adam Shillard asks, are there any other figures like St. Christopher? Bishop Barron talked about the donkey. Jesus rode as a Christopher. Okay, no, so Bishop Barron talked about the donkey Jesus rode as a Christopher, or Christ carrier, bearer of Christ to the world. Thoughts? And then he says, seems like Mary would be another example of a St. Christopher and John the Baptist. Am I losing it? And then a laughing face. Yes, that's not the same. It's not the same. So, well, it's not totally completely separate, right? So the donkey that carries Christ, Bishop Barron is very smart to notice that is definitely a Christopher, and very much so. One of the images of Christ that the church fathers saw in the Old Testament was the Balaam's ass. If you guys know the story, Balaam was a sorcerer who was going to curse the people of Israel, was going to curse the chosen people. And as he was going to curse the chosen people, an angel appeared on the road with a sword, to I don't remember if in the story it says he has a sword, but an angel appeared and was going to cut him down. And then his ass starts to move to the side, veer to the side. And Balaam is like beating it so that it gets back onto the path. And then it starts to veer again to the side, and he's like beating it to get it to the path, and then at some point the ass lays down, and Balaam is like beating his donkey, like, what are you doing? Why aren't you moving? And everything. And then the donkey speaks and tells him, that he saved his life and that he saved him from the judgment of this angel. And so that has always been an image that the church fathers use for Christ. And so really is this notion, the possibility of the animal aspect to carry the logos. And so that ass is an extension of your body, right? Just like you ride your body, you can also extend that into a car or a horse or a donkey or whatever. Like, you extend your power to direct yourself with these. And so the ass becomes an image of that, and especially an image of that because the donkey is an impure animal as well. And so there's also this idea of the foreigner in the notion of the ass as well. Just like Christopher was a Canaanite, just like Christopher was a foreigner, the ass is also related to the foreigner. It'd be difficult to go into all the reasons why, but one of the reasons is that he's impure. Another reason is some of the characters in the Old Testament, like Hamor, who was different characters who are foreigners and who are like the red donkey, kind of helping you understand this notion of the foreigner as and Hebrew Jews until today, they interpret the donkey as the foreign nations, and so you have this sense that when Christ is riding the donkey, he's riding the foreign nations. So you can imagine, for example, the Roman Empire converting. That's like St. Christopher transformation, where St. Christopher converts to Christianity, carries Christ further out. Where in terms of the Mother of God, it's different. It's similar in the sense that, in a way, the Mother of God represents this potentiality that receives the logos, but there's really a difference between the wild, like the animal, foreigner, prostitute, I should do the other hand, left hand, warrior, like the foreigner, prostitute, donkey, impure, all that stuff. And then the notion of potentiality as this pure, untouched, virgin state in which the logos finds the proper house. So you really have to separate those two, because they do end up being important in the West. That's why you really do have this. You have Mary, the Mother of God, and then you have Mary Magdalene. And so those two opposites represent two aspects of the church and two aspects of the incarnation. In the East, we don't have Mary Magdalene the way she is in the West, but we have Saint Mary of Egypt. So Mary of Egypt is everything. She's a prostitute. She's a foreigner. Lives on the other side of the Jordan. She has all the elements about that wild aspect, which is then can also receive Christ and be tamed by Christ. And so we have to be able to really differentiate the two. One we could call it the inner mystery of the pure heart, which receives the logos, which descends into it and manifests itself. And the other is the garments of skin, you could say, that can be transformed into garments of glory. Something like that. Hopefully that makes sense, guys. All right. And yeah, and here actually, and he says John the Baptist, and I think that's an important aspect, because the Mother of God, that's why in the icon of the diocesis in Orthodoxy, we have Christ in the center sitting on a throne, and then to his right is the Mother of God, to his left is St. John the Baptist. And so the Mother of God is the right hand. She's everything the right hand is. She's pure, she's untouched. She also is this condensation of the logos into her womb. She has all that in her. And then St. John the Baptist is the left side. He's wild. He wears garments of skin. He lives in the desert. He screams at the authorities. He's baptizing people. He's killing them. Like he's putting them in water and he's bringing them out. He's and then he lives by the sword, and like Christ said, live by the sword, die by the sword. He gets his head chopped off. And so, and then you have the same, you have these right hand and these left hand saints. The St. Peter and St. Paul also have that same structure. And so that it's interesting. This relates more to the other question that was asked in terms of the two sides, you could say. All right. So David Patterson asks, Jonathan, picking up a question I raised in January, I would be interested in to hear you compare and contrast the stories of Noah and the shipwreck of St. Paul. I would also be interested to hear your views on the recent movie Noah starring Russell Crowe. Perhaps this would make a great video in the future. Well, I actually wrote an article on the Noah movie. It's probably the only movie criticism that I've actually written out. And so if you go to my website, you could probably find it. If you go to it was written on the Orthodox Art Journal, so you could probably find my interpretation there. In terms of understanding the relationship between the shipwreck and Noah, I would say, I think that story of the shipwreck of St. Paul is for sure extremely interesting. And I think it's really worth looking, especially at the part where the boat crashes on Malta. And then it really is the shipwreck part of the story, because it strings together all these elements about that have to do with, let's say, a voyage out to sea, or a voyage towards the foreigner, you could say, or the crossing over of the sea. Like St. Christopher could have been carrying St. Paul across the sea to go to Rome. And in the meanwhile, in the middle, he has to deal with the craziness of the border, craziness of the periphery. And so, first of all, the ship wrecks. The structure in which they're in is no, they don't. They get stuck for the winter, right? If I remember correctly, I forget now. But I think the boats do wreck. Anyway, one interesting part is that it says in the text that I should have the text in front of me. It's like, here am I trying to remember everything. It says that they're barbarous people, which is already interesting because here they're facing these barbarians, these barbarian foreigners. And then there's a crazy part where they make a fire, and then St. Paul gets bitten by a snake, right? St. Paul gets bitten by a snake, and they all think he's going to die, but he's not going to die. So it's like he goes to the edge of the world, and then he encounters these barbarian foreigners. He has a shipwreck. They also, I think they run out of food as well, right? They eat the meat, but then they throw out the grain, which is really interesting, which has to do with the throwing out the seed, but then eating the flesh. And so it's like they eat meat, but they throw out the grain, and then they go on this like island in the middle of nowhere, and they meet these barbarians, and then he gets bitten by a snake, but he ends up being fine. And so you really have this, so it really is this crazy move into the periphery, like right into the beast, you could say, as he's going towards Rome. Now, people don't like this. They don't like the fact that all of this is prophetic about what's going to happen, you know, which is that St. Paul crossing from Israel to Rome. That's it. That's the story of Christianity, people. That's what happened. You know, it's like there was a crossing over, and the Romans are the ones who became the Christopher. The Romans are the ones who carried Christ, and the Romans converted, you know, and Christ, everybody was waiting for a Messiah that was supposed to let's say to take over the Roman Empire. And that's what happened. It just took 300 years, but that's what happened. And so that story of St. Paul crossing over from Israel to Rome, and then getting, you know, going through this kind of almost like Ulysses, you know, all these Ulysses, very short, but a lot of Ulysses experiences, meeting barbarians, getting bitten by a snake, you know, tossing out the seed, keeping the flesh. It's like all that it's a great little segment in the Bible. And then moving to Rome to become a martyr, but then to become the new seed of this new world, which is preparing itself to appear on the horizon. So yeah, it's a great story. Hopefully that answers. So Adam says that he linked the Noah article in the Facebook group. Thanks, Adam. All right, so Tyson and Jessica Geb. I hope you're pronouncing that right. I think you're here. Is it Geb or Gabe? Gabe. Hopefully this will tie in with Adam Shallard's question earlier. In your research on St. Christopher, have you run across the Greco-Egyptian god Hermanubis? If so, what are your thoughts on their relationship to one another? I can't help but see similarities both in their appearance as dog-headed men and as guides or bearers across liminal spaces, threshold, rivers. And so I'm going to give you guys a massive spoiler, because it's a very spoiler long term, because we talked about the donkeys and we talked about Hermanubis, and both those appear in our epic graphic novel that we are preparing. And so you will see both of those, and you will see the relationship between Christopher and these elements in the story. So look forward to that. It's a little bit okay. Tyson says rhymes with tribe. So Tyson Guide. Okay, all right, I will remember that. So yes, there is a relationship. Now, it's really interesting, because this is an example where there is absolutely no historical relationship between the fact that Christopher is represented with the dog head and figures like Anubis or Hermanubis. There's no historical causality between the two, but obviously there's a pattern relationship, because like you said in your question, both of them are liminal. Both of them cross over a river, you know, because Anubis was the character that crossed people over the river in terms of death in the Egyptian mythology. And so And so there's definitely a relationship in terms of the pattern. And I think that, yeah, it's definitely worth pondering about that. There are other characters like that. Someone sent me a story. I forget the name of I think it's Orion. There's a story about Orion also carrying a boy on his shoulders across an expanse of water. So Orion is a giant, right? He's a Titan. And so you get, I've told you guys that Christopher is either a dog-headed man or a giant. And so it's like these stories, they keep repeating themselves. And there's also the story about the hybrid when the Hercules is going to cross a river with his wife, and he can't cross. And so there's a centaur who comes and proposes to cross his wife over the river. And then you see the negative aspect of the crossing over, because the centaur tries to take his wife, to rape Hercules' wife. And then Hercules has to like shoot an arrow and kill the centaur in order to stop him. And so you can get the negative aspect of the crossing something over in that story. All right. So let's see another question by Tyson and Jessica Geib. What are your thoughts on the agency of holy relics and mere streaming icons? They seem to act in the world on their own accord and with intent. Are they bodiless powers, conduits, non-human persons? None of the above. So the way that you have to see the power of relics or the power of icons, they have to be seen as extensions of the saint, who is an extension of Christ's kingdom in the world. That's how you have to see it. You have to see it as like there's a kingdom of heaven which is manifesting itself, and that kingdom is a hierarchy of persons who are in Christ. And so the saints are in that hierarchy. The saints participate in they have become one, you could say. They rule with Christ. There's a way to see it. So they become patrons, they become holy patrons of things in the world. And that also includes, that's why they also have a patronage in terms of people. They have patronage in terms of buildings, like churches who are named after different saints who see the saint as their patron. Now, none of this removes the kingdom of Christ. That's really important, and it's very difficult for people especially people coming from Protestantism, to understand. When you receive bread from your parents, you are still receiving it from God. The fact that you receive the bread from a lower principality doesn't necessarily mean that it's not also coming from above, right? It's like the person who's giving food out to the homeless in a shelter, the food isn't coming from that person. Yes, it's coming from that person to a certain extent, because they're the ones who, with the love in their heart, they're giving you the food, but the food is coming from the organization which is organizing this event, giving food to the homeless. And so the person giving out the food, you can say thank you to that person, and you can be grateful for that person because they're participating in the process to bring you this gift. But it's not an obstacle to understanding that the food is coming from higher above. So that's the same thing with saints, with relics, all of that. And so you have to see a relic or a miraculous icon as an extension of the saint. So it's harder for people to see it in terms of those types of causalities because we're materialists. But think about it this way. You read a book by someone, and then your life changes because you read that book, that you're healed of something that you were dealing with, some issue, some problem. Like your life changes because you read a book. And so that book is an extension of the person who wrote it. But it's also not just an extension of that person. If that book is having an effect on you, a positive effect, a good effect, then it's also an extension of a principality. If it's having a negative effect, it's probably an extension of a negative principality, of a wild principality, or some. I don't like using. I should sometimes use the word demon, but I don't want to use the word demon because people have weird ideas about. People have they have horror movie ideas about that, and so it's hard to use those words without people not understanding what you're talking about. But if, let's say, the book is helping you, then that person necessarily has to be a vehicle for patterns that are beneficial to you, the patterns that exist above him that are higher than that person, patterns of behavior, patterns of being, patterns of thought, patterns of how the world lays itself out. And so if it's helping you, then it's all of that is together. And so when it's related to knowledge and to meaning and to psychology, for some reason we understand it, but it's harder for us to understand that someone could encounter, let's say, a relic and be healed of something because they come into contact with that relic, which is an extension of the saint who is under the let's say, who's in the kingdom of heaven, in the kingdom of God, and is ruling with Christ the world. Hope that makes sense to you guys. But I think that's how you have to see it. You have to see everything as fitting up. I don't know how many times I've talked about the hierarchy since I've been talking to you guys, but that's the way to see it. That's the way to kind of understand it. All right. So I don't know if any of you guys have some questions in the chat, because I was going to finish at 10:30, but we do have a few minutes left if you guys want to. So once again, I'm pretty sure that this Q&A I'm not going to make public. Pretty sure that I'm not going to do that with this one. Every time it's like I realize I get the feeling that I'm saying things that people won't understand, because I know that you guys that have been following me for a long time, I really hope that I've taken you far. Like I feel like I did start with like baby steps, like trying to say, okay, these words that we use, they mean something. They're not just arbitrary. Let's understand what they mean. And then I'm bringing you to a point where I can say something, talk about elves and can talk about elves and fairies and all this stuff. And hopefully, I'm not freaking any of you out and you understand and you can relate it back to the things that I've talked about before. If not, go back and listen to my old videos because, yeah. All right, let's see. We got a question here in the chat. So Norman Grondin asks, with Christ, I'm saying your name in French. I don't know if you're French, but it seems to me like it would be Grondin. With Christ defying categorization, embodying paradox, is this an example of Christ as a supreme individual? That we should seek to follow this example of not being able to be put into categories. Okay, so there's a difference. There's a difference between transcendence or synthesis and confusion. And it's really important to not mix those two up, because they're literally the opposite. And they're literally one is an inversion of the other, and one is like one will lead you into serious problems. And so there's a type of not fitting into categories, which is a form of hybridity, a form of confusion, a form of mixture, a form of strangeness. All of that is a manner in which we don't fall into categories. Okay. Now, Christ in a certain manner does defy category in the sense that he joins them together. So he joins everything together. So he's the king, and he's the he's the stranger. He's the king, and he's the criminal who's crucified outside the city. But because he's innocent, then he also doesn't compromise the fact that he's the king. So he takes these two extremes and he joins them together into one person, but there's no confusion. So the way that the fathers always express it is always unity without confusion. And so Christ is man and God fully, completely without confusion. And so it's not that he doesn't fit into categories like a monster doesn't fit into categories. And so that's really super important, because the world is so messed up today that you will see people talk about, let's say, the fact that being a weird androgynous type of person is somehow in the image of Christ, in the sense that Christ transcended the opposites of gender. And it's like, it's true that Christ transcended the opposites of gender, but he did that by being a man. He did that by also embodying a particular. And so his transcendence happens through a particular. And it's nonetheless a transcendence, but it's not a kind of weird universal, because that's what, like the globalist idea is really that. It's like, let's eliminate difference. Let's eliminate the particular, and then we'll find this transcendent thing. But that's not how Christianity works. Christianity is through the particular. And so it's like, you are a man, a woman, you're a Canadian, an American, you have this history, you have this family, you have this culture, you have all of that. And so it's like, through that, you can reach something which transcends it, but not as a kind of strange abstraction, you could say, of your particular. So I hope that makes sense. All right, guys. So Adam asked, would you consider doing another video on Gregory of Nyssa's Life of Moses? I mean, maybe. I made two. There's two videos. There's one that's called Finding God in Stories. And then the other one is called, what's it called? Something about St-Gregory of Nyssa. I think it's about St-Gregory of Nyssa's Life of Moses. And so I don't know. I feel like I said what I wanted to say. I mean, maybe if you guys have some questions about St-Gregory of Nyssa's Life of Moses, you can ask them, and I'd be happy to answer them. I think that if I do make some videos on other subjects related to the church fathers, I'm hoping to make something more about St. Maximus. I'm going to be in Seattle in May. You can find that information on my website. I'm participating in a conference with Father Stephen Freeman. And one of the subjects is going to be the anthropology of hesychasm. So I'm going to talk more about Orthodox mysticism and and how the structure that the fathers gave to the human person is parallel to this cosmic structure that I'm always talking to you guys about, the garden and the tree and all that, and the temple and the church. And so I'm going to show how the human person is represented in the same manner. Hopefully that'll be more patristic. It's hard to go into things that are too precise directly on the YouTube channel, just because the audience is so wide. What I think I'm going to do if I make videos like that, it'll be like, if I'm invited by a parish to come speak, then I'll feel totally comfortable talking about specific things, very specific, and then I'll put it on the channel. But everybody will see that I'm in a church, like I'm talking in a church. And so to me, that I try to find a balance between those types of videos and the more general videos, so that people don't get lost in what I'm saying. So yeah. So I said a lot of crazy things today, but I really I had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I'm starting to really enjoy these Q&As. And as usual, guys, I want to thank everybody for your support, for being part of this little strange group of people trying to understand the world through this lens. I'm excited about what's coming next. You know, I feel like I'm in a groove now. I feel like I found my team in terms of working with people to edit the videos and for the podcast and the website, and all of this is kind of set, and I have an assistant for the carving, and so I feel like I'm in a pretty good groove. So I'm able to make more content, and so I'm hoping to keep that up and try to have at least one video a week, maybe more. Yeah, and I think I might try to do a live stream once. I've never done it, but like a public live stream, just to see what happens, to see how that goes, if anybody shows up. So I might try that at some point. And all right, guys. So I am going to sign off, and I will see you all around on Facebook, on YouTube, and I'll see you next month. Bye-bye.